ancestors and tribal ways. He's been asked to share those stories with us on this evening, and he's in the past shared them with various schools and universities, historical groups, and organizations. So those stories shared vary from tribe and life on the plains and reservations, and sometimes there are stories about Quanah's parents, Cynthia and Parker and Peter Nakona, and of course, Quanah Parker and current day events. Also shared are children's stories that were passed down through the family lineage. So without further ado, please give a very warm welcome to our special guest, Mr. Lance Tahmahkera. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Y'all can hear me okay back there? Good deal. Let's talk about the Comanche people. First of all, when I first walked in, one of the first questions was the line that goes through the U. Normally you pronounce a U as a U, but if you see the line through the U, you pretend you got shot with an arrow and you go, So, Numina is what we call ourselves. It just simply means the people. The Utes gave us our Comanche. Spanish changed it to Comanche. I brought with me my high-tech laser pointer. I don't think it's going to reach over there, but I'm just going to point over there anyway. But it's generally agreed to that the Comanche people, we basically came from the Shoshones. And if you look western Wyoming, Utah area, Idaho, that's where we came from. There's several stories on how we split from the Shoshones. One story was that there was a sickness in the tribe. The chief at the time, he had the wisdom to say, if I take my large tribe, split them into different small bands and send them in different directions, if one of those bands survives, the tribe survives. Another theory is that I heard that there were people in the tribe that knew that the buffalo were out there on the Great Plains. And you could live off of buffalo, the hide, the hooves, the bones, the meat, everything. That could be your way of life, just follow the buffalo. I don't know what's true. We never wrote anything down. The Comanche people, we never had a written language until I want to say 76 maybe, that the tribal elders, the language was getting lost. They came together and they decided to write down the Comanche words. For us, the Comanches, you would find us, and we weren't just one large tribe, we were several bands of tribes. There might have been as many as 3 dozen at one time. But you'd find us as far as Nebraska, Kansas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, even to Colorado. Wherever the buffalo was where you would find the Comanches. We were the most dominant tribe out on the plains. And the simple reason is that we learned how to ride the horse, how to hunt, how to fight from the back of a horse. We dominated all the other tribes. Little boys, even little girls, from the time they could walk, that's when they were being taught how to ride a horse. Typical Comanche male, you could see his buckskin shirt, his hair. You see the beaver pelt that wraps around his braids. Comanche men are real funny, not me, but Comanche men are real funny about their hair, and they would protect it with the beaver pelt. The leggings, you see the fringe on the leggings. It would literally hang down on the ground and drag behind them maybe a foot, so that wherever they walked, That fringe would wipe away the footprint. You never knew he was there. It was just a form of stealth. Typical Comanche lady, her two children, the modern day stroller, the papoose, there, the one on the left. That's a little boy on the right. Little boys wore dresses until they were 2 years old. And growing up, understand that the mother, well, she was the one that was gathering the wood. She was treating the hides or tanning the hides. She was doing the domestic chores. The father, he was off on a hunt. He was off on a raid. It was normally the grandparents that raised the child. And then the whole tribe itself saw to the welfare of those children. Let's go back to 1836. Bahia, it's what, about 90 miles south of us? Groesbeck. In 1834, the Parkers came down from the Illinois area. They didn't all show up at the same time. They just kind of filtered into that area. But they built this fort and for protection. They'd farm a little bit inside the fort, but most of the farming was outside the fort. In May of 1836, depending on what book you're reading, maybe 200 or 300 Comanches, Kiowas, we showed up there. And what I've learned over the years is that if you're on the winning side of a battle, you call it a raid. But if you're on the losing side, you got to call it a massacre. So tonight we're going to call it a raid. We showed up and we killed 5 people. We took 5 captives. We took Miss Kellogg, Miss Plummer, Miss Plummer's son James. He might have been maybe 9 at the time. We took Cynthia. She was 9. We took Cynthia's little brother. He was 6. His story is almost as fantastic as hers, and nobody really knows about it. He stayed with the Comanches for about 9 years. And these raids, when you would steal people, the women, you could literally barter them back and trade them for whatever you needed or whatever you could trade for. But the children, you need to understand, people died at an early age. It was just a way of replenishing the numbers of the tribe. So I want to say Miss Kellogg was ransomed back within, a couple of years or a couple of months. And even during this 1836, maybe I ought to go back even a little bit further here. Last week of January, first week or the first 2 weeks of February, down in San Antonio, what's going on? The Alamo. The next month, you've got San Jacinto and Texas wins its independence, becomes a republic. It was the very next month that this raid happened. And there's actually a connection because Sam used and paid for Miss Kellogg's ransom, paid her ransom for her to come back. I want to say Miss Plummer stayed with the Comanches 2 years before she finally got ransomed back. James was ransomed back 7, 9 years later when John Parker. The story about John was that he got ransomed back. He went to live with his family, and he didn't like it. He had been with the Comanches that long. He didn't like the white man's way, so he went back to the Comanches. 1860 rolls around. The Civil War breaks out. He comes back and fights for the Texas Confederacy. And then after the war, he goes back to Mexico and lives out his days there. He's got a really great story too. But Cynthia, she stayed with us for about 24 years, or right after 24 years. Pettit Nakota was the chief at the time of the Nakotas. She married him. She was his only wife. on his knee, and he would tell me children's stories. You understand that storytelling is the way that the elders taught their young on how to live their life. We didn't have books, but there had to be a way to teach the young. And the story about the buffalo was that when the Creator, he put the animals out on the plains, he put the birds in the sky, the fish in the water, he understood that he needed a caretaker here on earth to care for his animals. So he went to his most strongest, fastest, mightiest of all his creatures, which was the buffalo. It didn't have that hump on his back. His head was way up in the air. He was the strongest, the mightiest, the fastest. And he said, "Buffalo, I want you to be my caretaker." And the buffalo said, "I can do that, I'll do it." And for a long time, there was peace on the plains, and things were just like they should be. But as time goes on, this buffalo gets to thinking, I'm stronger, I'm mightier, I'm faster, I must be superior. More time goes on, and his heart is just hardened. And he's thinking, I'm the superior animal. These are my plains, and I don't want any more animals on my plains. And he started to run them off. And it came down to an afternoon, he's walking across a meadow. As he's running across that meadow, he didn't see the bird's nest that had fallen from the limbs was laid on the ground. He trampled it. The Great Spirit, he couldn't take any more. He came down, he says, "Buffalo, what have you done? I made you the strongest, the mightiest, the fastest, and all I ask you to do is be a caretaker for others." He said, "Today you attacked one of my creatures and you trampled others. Because of that, I'm going to put this hump on your back. Your head will be lowered to the ground, and you'll walk your days looking for those birds' nests." So that's how the buffalo got the hump on his back. Now, if I'm the tribal elder, what's the moral of my story I'm trying to teach you? What was Ben trying to teach me? That's it. That's what I got. Be humble. Don't think of yourself as superior to others. We're put on this earth to care for each other. It was a good story, and every time I went, he would tell me a new story. He was a wonderful man. Those buffalo, it was estimated that in North America there might have been 30 to 45 million buffalo in North America at one time. This map was drawn by William Hornaday, and he was a gentleman in late 1800s. He was with the Smithsonian Institute. He did taxidermy for them, and then he later became the director of the Bronx Zoo when it opened. And while he was at the zoo, he decided, well, I'm going to go out there west. I've heard about these buffalo. I want to go kill some, bring them back, and put a display up for them. And he went out there, and there weren't any buffalo out there to be found. He had to make a second trip out there to go find them. You see the red area when they were at their peak? Those tiny little dots, that's where the buffalo could be found. It was estimated that in the wild there might have been less than 100. Altogether, there might have been 1,200 still alive when it was all said and done. Several reasons for the extermination of the buffalo. One of the primary was that we're at war with the United States, and they were at war with the Indians. They knew that if they killed the buffalo, our source of food, they could force us onto the reservations. In England, to wear a buffalo robe coat was a popular thing. It was the age of machinery, industrial revolution, I guess, maybe. It was like a second one, and this was the second revolution. They needed those big, thick bells to turn those wheels. You kill the buffalo, use the hide for the pulley. But they nearly went extinct. We'll skip forward to 1867. There in southern Kansas. After 30 or 40 years of being at war with the United States, the Plains tribes, we were tired. The Kiowas, Comanches, Apaches, Cheyenne. We were tired. We wanted to go live on the reservation. Terms of this treaty was simply that we would stop raiding the settlers. We would go live on 3 million acres of reservation land that they set aside from us, or set aside for us. In return, they would not allow any buffalo hunters on our reservation. They would give the children new clothing once a year. They'd give the families rations. They'd build us a hospital like we really knew what that was. But they wanted to build the schools too for the children. And we went and lived there. Interesting thing about that treaty that got signed, and there was basically 3 different treaties over about 7 to 10 days that the signings occurred, is that each chief was supposed to go back to his tribe and get 3/4 of the men to agree to this treaty. The government officials, they took that treaty back up to Washington. Congress debated it, but they never ratified the treaty. And what I never understood, and I still don't understand, is that both sides adhered to this treaty. I don't get it. But that's what we did. We were given like 2 years to get on the reservation. The reservation itself, that bottom right corner, the southeast corner, you're right there across the river from Gainesville. The southwest corner, you're up there by Vernon. The northwest corner, that's Elk City, Oklahoma. And then the northeast corner, you're really close to Norman, Oklahoma. 3 million acres for the Kiowas, Comanches, Apaches. We were all grouped together. Before I get off this slide, and his uncle, his name was Post Oak Jim. He was a medicine man. And he told a story about, it might have been around the 1850s, those Navajos from out west, they decided they wanted to come east and steal our ponies from us, take them back. Well, I mean, this is Comanche land. We know everything that's going on, and, we don't put up with that kind of stuff. So those Navajos, they camped on this, it's called Navajo Mountain now. It's more of just a hill. But they camped there that night. And that night, the Comanches, they surrounded it. They went up that hill and they killed all of those Navajos except one. And they told him, we're going to let you live, but you got to go back and tell your people, don't ever come back. You don't belong here. This is Comanche land. That was a Post Oak Jim story. But at that Medicine Lodge Treaty, the Quahadas were there, the band that Quanah was part of. They didn't sign that treaty. And his leadership alone, that he was able to keep us out on the plains as hunters and warriors for another 8 years, is phenomenal. The buffalo were nearly extinct. We still raided, but he kept us out there. I don't know if you can see this or not. See this branch here? That's a braid. That's a braid. And of course, this picture was taken after Quanah had surrendered. But the story goes that when he went to visit with the Parkers, they gave him Cynthia Ann's hair. And that's his hair or her hair that he wore. Story about, Quanah being able to keep us out there on the plains. The picture on the right, Don Parker is that gentleman I'm standing next to, where's in front of that showcase. And you see Quanah's war bonnet there in the case. This was taken about 3 years ago, Panhandle Plains Museum in Canyon, Texas, just south of Amarillo. The lance is not the same lance that's in that case. Topay made the lance that's in the case. But we're just standing there in front of that case, and for out of nowhere, Don starts telling me this story about there was a day, and have y'all been to West Texas, the Llano Estacada? I mean, it's as flat as this stage. I mean, people nod their head you could see for miles and miles and miles. It is so flat, there are no trees. And the story goes that Randall McKenzie had been tasked with finding Quanah and the Quahatas and forced us onto the reservation. And there was a day that we could see each other. The Quahatas could see him, but he could see us. And we were in pursuit. The women, children, they had packed up, and we were trying to get out of there. The Braves, they hung back and harassed the troops to slow them down, etc. The Braves would just come up periodically to tell Quanah the status of how close they're getting, etc. And finally, Quanah, the guy comes up and says, Quanah, they're nearly on us. And Quanah said, go find the medicine man. So the medicine man came up. He says, Quanah, what do you want? And Quanah said, they're nearly on us. He says, well, what do you want me to do about it? He said, fix it. That medicine man. That medicine man stopped where he was at. He took out his tobacco pouch, took out his pipe, and he began to smoke and offer prayers. And out of nowhere, it started to snow. It was like in October, but it started to snow out there. And it got to the point where we couldn't see each other anymore. It became a blizzard and ice and sleet where they couldn't follow our footprints. They couldn't see that. They were covered up too. And we got away that day. Don told me that in front of this case right there, right after that picture was taken. There was a gentleman standing next to us. His name is Ty Creedler with Texas Tech University. He's on the board of the West Texas Historical Association. It's like he turned white as a goat. We thought he was going to pass out. He said, I know the other side of that story. He said, you see, there was a Robert Carter, a Captain Robert Carter, that rode with McKenzie. And he dedicated one of the chapters of his book to that day. And their side of the story was that they could see us. They were getting closer and closer. And out of nowhere, it started to snow, and it was sleeting. And it was getting late in the day. Their ponies were giving out. They were running out of rations, and McKenzie made that decision just to break off the pursuit. It's the first time I've ever heard the same story told from the two different sides. It was a neat evening that day. The very next day, we were invited down to Quinnipiac, Caprock Canyon State Park. We were asked to offer a blessing to the buffalo there. Charles Goodnight, his wife, I believe her name was Mary, they helped save buffalo there in that area. And that herd is still there today. We met up at the museum in Quinnipiac. And before we caravanned out there to the park for this blessing, the park ranger comes in and he says, you're not going to see any buffalo today. He said, I've been out there. They're all on the north end of the park, and we're not going to see any, but we still want you to do a cedar blessing. But, okay, we're here. So we all caravanned out there, and the place where we park is close to this pavilion, which is about, I don't know, maybe 80 yards away. And right outside the parking lot, there's 3 buffalo waiting on us. Don gets out, and you can't see it, but in his hand is a drum and a drumstick. He's a peyote man, practices the peyote religion. And he sang 2 songs to this buffalo. You know, drumming on his drum there. And when he finished that second song, that buffalo did a 180 and just bolted off in the opposite direction. I mean, at a run. And him and this buffalo were like across this stage distance. And everybody thought that was pretty neat. We got to see the buffalo, and they still want us to do the cedar ceremony. So they're all watered off, you know, to this pavilion area, and it's just me and Don standing there. I said, Don, what song did you sing to that buffalo? He said, my first song was a Heights song. Heights means friend. He said, but my second song, I told that buffalo I knew that he was sick. I knew he was going to die, and he needed to go off to die. Those animals understand us, and I've got more examples of this. Now, on the lighter side, when we left that evening, or left an hour or 2 later, those 3 buffalo were still alive, so we're good, you know. Have y'all been to Paladura Canyon? I see nodding heads out there. And if you've not been there, again, this land is pretty flat out there. It's kind of got some rolling hills in that area, but it's still real flat. You can be walking along, and all of a sudden you just look down and there's this canyon that's 600 feet deep. Its widest part is like 20 miles. It's about 110 miles long. But it's just this canyon. That's where we went in the wintertime. Down there, there's game, there's water. It was out of the wind. That's where you'd find us. And my Uncle K.O., you know, I always bring up, you know, when I see him, I always bring up the canyon, because he always says if it wasn't for those Tonka scouts that ratted us out, the kids would still be out there in West Texas looking for us. 1874. I believe it was in October, it's going into the fall. Randall McKenzie, troops from Fort Richardson. I can't think of the name, the fort there in New Mexico, just inside New Mexico. Fort Sill. They came at us from 3 different areas into that canyon, and they routed us out of there. We had some 1,400 ponies with us that we had to leave in the canyon because we were crawling up the walls to get out. Randall McKenzie, he did not want to kill us so much as he wanted those horses. He knew that if he took care of those horses, that we could no longer be warriors and hunters out on the plains and roam like we did. There were some 1,400 ponies. He took the ones that he wanted, and he had his soldiers shoot the rest of them. You know, our days of the nomadic warrior hunter was over. Quanah surrendered 1875, June of next year. But this is where his story really picks up, because now he's around the white man, and they're always writing something down or putting it in the paper or whatever. So there's a lot more documentation on Quanah. But the first thing Quanah did when he got back, or when he surrendered there at Fort Sill, he asked, what happened to my mother? We were off on a hunt. We come back, our camp's been raided. My mother's gone, and we don't know what happened to her. What happened? And the agency man said, Quanah, I don't know, but I know there's Parkers living in East Texas. I'll write you a letter where you can leave the reservation. You go talk to them and you find out what happened. And that's what he did. He spent a period of time with them. That's where he started to learn how to speak English. He was around all these Parkers, and out of respect, he became Quanah Parker. He became a prominent leader. He was a great leader anyway, but on the reservation, his leadership really stood out to the point where finally the Kiowa, Comanche, Apache reservation, the government officials, they appointed him as the principal chief of that reservation. He became a judge. He was at Teddy Roosevelt's inaugural parade, 1905. This picture here that was taken, if y'all have ever heard of the 1905 Teddy Roosevelt wolf hunt, the story goes that this gentleman, Jack Abernathy, there with the coyote in his hand, he had a knack for, he would wrap his arm up in a heavy leather, go out there and provoke a wolf or a coyote to attack him, and when it bit his arm, he would wrestle it to the ground, capture it alive, and then sell it to the zoos back east. Teddy Roosevelt heard about that and wanted to see it, so these West Texas ranchers, they put together a wolf hunt for him. Some of them are ranchers, some of them are Texas Rangers. Quanah, Teddy Roosevelt. They respected him so much that he told those ranchers, the Burke, Burnett's, and Wagners, he said, I've got all these wives, I've got all these children, and he did. He had like 24 children. Not all his, but he had all these children. He says, I want y'all to build me a house. So those ranchers, they didn't actually build the house themselves, they paid for the lumber. It's right there at the base of the Wichita Mountains there, just north of Cache. It's called the Star House. And if you don't know about the Star House, the stars, Quanah, he came to Fort Worth quite a bit for, business deals, negotiating leases with those ranchers for them to run their cattle across there up north and to graze. He was all the time doing business deals in Fort Worth. But he was at Fort Sill, Washington, around military people quite a bit. And he knew that the more stars you had on your shoulder, the more important you were. So he went and had 7 stars painted on his roof. Now the far right star, that's the kitchen. That smokestack is for the stove. That second star in, well, that's the dining room. And then you got the upstairs and downstairs living quarters. This is a picture taken within the dining room. That's Quanah there at the end of the table. The reason I'm showing this to you is that there's a story that's fairly well known. Before Oklahoma was about to cease being a territory and become a state, a government official approached Quanah and said, Quanah, you're going to be living in America here. You can only have one wife. And the story goes, the lighthearted story goes, that Quanah just thought about it and he says, okay, well, you pick the one that gets to stay and you go tell the others they got to leave. That's kind of true, but it's a lot more serious than that. It really angered Quanah that he told him that. He said, I took these women in because their husbands were dead. I took those children in because their father was dead. How could I send them away? Tope told Anna that was a true story. And it went a little further in that one day right after this happened, he called all his wives into the dining room and he told them, if any of you are unhappy living here, I want you to come to me and we'll talk and I'll decide if you can leave. He wasn't the macho, I'm the guy, the one in charge thing. He truly cared for his people, and he wanted to make sure that if she left, there would be somebody to care for her and her children. That was the kind of leader he was. Y'all been to Northside Coliseum, Stockyards area, Fort Worth? This picture was taken the second year that it was there in 1909. They finished it in 1908. This picture was taken in 1909. I was actually shown a letter that was given to him, or a notice that was given to him when he showed up that day. And it basically said, this is where your tribe is going to camp on the Trinity River. If anybody leaves that area, we're going to arrest them and throw them into jail. We were considered wards of the state when we went to the reservation. We didn't get our citizenship until the Snyder Act, 1921. I don't think we were able to vote until 48. Quanah was a proponent, supporter of education. He knew that our life as the nomadic warrior hunter was over. There were no more buffalo out there to hunt, nowhere else to roam. He understood that, and he understood that his tribe had to make a change to the white man's ways. What's the best way to change a tribe is to take the children and teach them how to be Americans. Those older men, those hunters, they were never going to learn how to farm. That wasn't in them. It just wasn't going to happen. But if you take the children and teach them how to be Americans from the get-go, that's what happened. The Fort Sill Indian boarding school, you didn't just go there in the morning and go home in the afternoon. You went and you lived there. In the morning time, they all would learn how to read, how to write, that kind of thing. But in the afternoons, the little boys, they went off into the fields, they learned how to farm, or they learned how to be a carpenter. The little girls, they learned how to sew. They made their own uniforms. They learned how to cook. But those kids were learning how to be Americans. My friend Jack Davis, he went to a different boarding school from Fort Sill, and he said that one day they took all the boys and they took them to a bank, and each boy took out a $15 loan. And for the first $5 they went, each bought a pig. And for that next $10, they had to use that to raise their pig. When the pig was old enough, they would sell the pig and go back and pay off their loan. Whatever was left over was theirs. It was a lesson on how to be an American. It was a conscious effort to teach them this is what we do in America these days. This is how you get by. You know, Dad went to this school. When he was 6, he came home for Christmas 6 months later, and he told his parents he had learned a foreign language called English. Maybe a couple of more stories about that was that there was this little Kiowa girl. She was told she couldn't speak her native language. So what'd she do? She spoke Comanche. She knew both languages. She got in trouble. She didn't understand why. She wasn't speaking Kiowa, so she didn't quite understand that. But another story was that those children, there was a little girl that was afraid that if she learned how to speak English, they would paint her skin white, and she'd be a white person. They just didn't know. I mean, these are people living out on the plains hunting. In this school itself, it took like 2 weeks. They put up teepees in the front yard so the children could acclimate to living in the teepee till they were not so afraid to go in the actual building itself. If you were the parent, you didn't send your child to the boarding school, your rations, whatever was promised, was withheld from you. But in time, it became a source of pride for those Comanche and Kiowa parents to send their child there. knowing that when they grew up, they would be able to fend for themselves. Not all boarding schools, and most of them were not good boarding schools. But the Forest Hill Indian Boarding School, it was a success. It opened in 1871. It didn't close until 1988. And it was a boarding school. Quanah actually sent some of his children, 3 of them, up there to Carlisle in Pennsylvania, that boarding school up there. You know, back in those days, it was a long train ride to get there. It's a long train ride to get back. And the story goes that he dropped his children off, and he comes back to Cache. And it wasn't no time that one of his daughters shows up at the door. Well, I mean, this is a long ways away, and she didn't know how to speak English. She didn't have anybody. You know, Quanah's not a dummy. He was going to find out what happened. He goes out to the bunkhouse. By that time, he had cowboys that ran his place for him. And he was asking them, how did my daughter get home? And they were too afraid of him to tell him. They said, maybe you ought to go talk to the foreman. So he finds the foreman. He says, tell me how my daughter got home. She can't speak English. She didn't have any money. And he said, Quanah, her and Emmett Cox, they're sweethearts. And he brought her back. It wasn't any time she became Mrs. Emmett Cox. But Quanah did something that was really unique. He took his second oldest daughter, the tall one there in the back, and he told her, you're not going to go to school. I don't want you to ever speak English. I want you only to dress as a Comanche. I want you to be the one that keeps our Comanche ways. I do not want our Comanche ways to get lost. The taller boy in the back on the right, that's Baldwin Parker. He's Quanah's oldest son. And the girl in the buckskin dress, that's Quanah Parker. But that girl that was never going to go to school and always speak Comanche, that's my great-grandmother. Her name's Wiote. And I remember her. She was a sweetheart. She didn't pass until, I want to say, 1967. She always wore that black and white polka dot dress. She always had her hair in a net. She never spoke a word of English I never heard it. Just a quick story about her was that her house, it didn't have electricity. If you wanted water, you had to go in the front yard. You had to pump it, which us little kids were glad to do, you know. But for whatever reason, the family decided she needed a telephone. So they ran a line to the house. They put a phone there in the living room. And one day the phone rings. And it's Ben, my dad's Uncle Ben, that tells me these stories. His property was next to hers. And they're talking in Comanche back and forth, and she says, hello? He says, it's me, Ben. She said, well, what do you want? And he says, well, have you seen my dog? You see, Ben raised hunting dogs. And she said, well, yeah, he's right out there on the porch laying down. And Ben said, well, bring him to the phone. She goes out on the porch and she brings this dog in the house. She holds the ear thing to his ear. And he yells out, Kima Sari, which means come dog. The dog hopped up, ran out the door, and ran home. You know, true story. Even our dogs talk Comanche. Quanah, he never stopped being the good son. He knew that his mother was buried there in East Texas. He always wanted to bring her back to Oklahoma. And it was about that same time, he actually spoke here, if y'all didn't know that. They asked him to come to the state fair and speak, and which he did. The gist of his message was that I used to be a bad person and I killed people. He said, but now I'm a good American and I pay my taxes. They liked him so much, he came back the very next year and basically gave the same speech. The downside is that he passed about 3.5 months later, so don't ask me to come back a second time, please. He was buried at Post Oak Cemetery there outside of Cache, not far from Cache. Or actually, this picture here, this was him bringing Cynthia back to Post Oak Cemetery, December of 1910. He passed about a month or so, about 6 weeks afterwards, buried there next to her. He, I want to say it was about 4 years after he had passed, grave robbers came in and dug him up, hoping to find regalia, anything he might have had that was buried with him of value. Some of the family says that he was buried in his full regalia. Some of the family says no, he wasn't. I'm not sure which. I tend to believe that he wasn't buried with that stuff. But it actually happened a second time. Nearly 20 years later, he was still so highly thought of that Congress appropriated funds to build him a monument. It's about 15 feet tall. This picture was taken about 1930, and they're at the unveiling. And I've given these talks for I don't know how, if I say 25 years, maybe, probably longer, I don't know. One of my friends growing up, he sat in one of these groups, and afterwards he got on to me and says, you don't have any pictures of your dad in your slideshow. And I said, okay, I'll put a picture of Dad in there. That little guy standing up front in the white shirt, that's my father. The gentleman on the far right, that's Quanah Parker. That's Quanah's oldest son. In 1957, Quanah and Cynthia were moved from Post Oak Cemetery to Fort Sill Cemetery. There's a little like a quarter acre staked out for all the tribal chiefs that signed that Medicine Lodge Treaty are buried right there in that location. And that's where they got moved. And I gave a talk in Denton at the courthouse one night, probably about 4 years ago. And afterwards, this lady, she came up to me, she says, I want to show you something, but I know you're busy, you're talking to all these people. I'll just sit down and I'll wait. And I'm talking for like 30 minutes to these people and just, taking pictures, etc. And she's still sitting there. But after it thinned out, she stands up and she hands me this little packet of pictures, black and white pictures. She said, we found them in a box in our house in Wichita Falls. It was the day that they were buried there. They were moved to Fort Sill. James Cox, the gentleman that's there on the left, the front, he was our very first tribal chairman. When we separated from the Kiowas, Comanches, Apaches, that one band, we went to our own separate bands. He was our first tribal chairman. They're carrying Cynthia in. That would be Cynthia in. And then you can see Quanah, his casket there in the background with the flag over it, and then that monument that they had dedicated in 1930. She allowed me to take the negatives. And I don't know why, but she said, I said, could I make copies? And she said, yeah, here you go. So I took them and I made my copies with the understanding that I would never publish or let anybody else have them. But I gave them back to her. it was a neat thing for her to do. And I'm not showing you all the pictures, but I went to kind of a family reunion, and we were all looking at these pictures, and then all these elders were saying, well, that's my aunt, and that's my uncle, and that's Winona there, and they were naming all these pictures, all these people in that picture. Let's skip forward to 1940. Lawton, Oklahoma, the newspaper. There was an ad placed that basically said, wanted, Comanche males, you must be single, and you must know how to speak Comanche. Just a simple ad. The U.S. Army was recruiting code talkers. Y'all have heard of the Navajo code talkers. They weren't recruited until 1942. The original code talkers were Choctaws back in World War I. And the story about that goes that there was an officer walking through a trench, and there were a couple of Choctaws on either side of him. As he walked past them, they were speaking in their language. And he couldn't understand what they were saying, and he got the bright idea that if I put one of those Choctaws at the front line, and if I put the other one back there where the cannons are at, they could just talk back and forth because, the Germans, everybody tapped into each line. You knew what was being said, or if you needed to code, it'd take maybe 30 minutes to code it, then decode it on the other end. The code talkers, you could just speak and instantly each side would understand what's going on. But back to 1940, that ad's placed. There were 21 Comanches that enlisted to be code talkers. 17 of them went to war. A little bit about those guys. There was a group of them that went to do their physical, and everybody passed the physical except for one. He was just too small. And the guy that was putting them through the physical, he said, we'll take all of you, but you, the little guy, you're too small, we're not going to take you. And those other guys, they said, you don't understand. If he doesn't go, we don't go. So they get in this argument. And the officer hears it in his office, and he comes out, and he wants to know what's going on. And the private says, sir, all of these passed their physical, but this was too small. He doesn't weigh enough. So the officer gives it a thought, and he says, okay, this is a Friday afternoon. Y'all go home. But you, the little guy, I want you to eat bananas and drink water all weekend long. So that's what he does. Monday, they show up. The little guy, he still doesn't make weight. And we're back into this argument again that we're not going if he don't go. And officer comes out there, and the private says, sir, he still doesn't make weight. And the officer says, okay. Little guy, get back on the scales. Private, I want you to reweigh him. And the private's weighed him, and all of a sudden he made weight. And the private looked down, and there's the officer's foot on the scales. The officer, when it was time for them to go to Fort Benning for their basic training, he gave all their documents to the little guy. He says, they think so highly of you. You're in charge until y'all get there. So these Comanches go off to Fort Benning to basic training. And back then, it varied from 4 to 5 weeks of basic training. Those Comanches, they finished it in 2. The very first morning that the DI came into the barracks, he was going to flip on the lights and roust them out of bed. He turns those lights on. They're already dressed. Their beds are already made. They're standing at attention there at the end. You see, they already knew how to be soldiers at Fort Sill Indian Boarding School. That's what you did every day. You wore your uniform. You learned how to march. They already knew that stuff. A couple of more stories was that one day they told their DI, they said, we don't know how to swim. And the DI said, okay, if you go down this road, you turn left, The swimming pool's down there. Y'all go down there, and the instructor will teach y'all how to swim. So off they go. And they never came back. That afternoon, the DI, he goes looking for them. They're diving off the diving board. They're swimming around. They knew how to swim. They just wanted to go swimming that day. You know? My dad's cousin, Roderick Red Elk, he was part of this group. They were there at D-Day. Utah Beach. Roderick, he was the first one to send a message from the shore back to the ships, and he basically told them, it's either 2 or 10 miles from where we should have landed. We're taking heavy artillery. We need help. That was in Comanche to the ships. That was the very first message off Utah Beach. The message back from the ship to shore was simply, we know where you're at, now get going. Those code talkers, they were with Patton during the bulge. Special people. And the reason I'm telling you all these stories, I was at a powwow several years ago. Dad called me. The Comanche homecoming powwow that weekend was going on. He said, "I want you to meet somebody." Charles Chibity. This was maybe in the mid-'80s. He was the last surviving code talker. And that afternoon, it was just a small, maybe a dozen of us sat under these giant cottonwood trees, and he just told these stories, just one right after the other. And you don't forget these stories. It was so neat to meet the gentleman. But let's talk a little bit about the eagle. You know, people ask, what's so special about the eagle? You know what? Why is that? And the way it was explained to me was simply that the eagle is the one creature that flies closest to our heavens, and therefore must be closest to our Creator. These are golden eagle feathers. These would be bald eagle feathers. The Comanches, we prefer these, not because they're prettier, but because bald eagles are known to eat their young. Golden eagles will not eat their young. My Uncle K.O., he went a little further into the description of the feather significance. If you notice the center stem, on either side they're called veins. And each vein is made up by little barbs that interlock with each other. That makes the vein. And the significance to the Comanche is that the stem represents our lifetime as a Comanche. And these two veins, or each little barb represents the individual things that happen in our life that make us up as a Comanche. When you handle these, just hold them by the stem. You know, our tribal way is that we don't collect eagle feathers ourselves. We have to earn them. That's the Comanche way, is that you should earn your own feathers. If you were brave in battle, if you did something that brought honor to your family or brought honor to your tribe, you were given an eagle feather. At powwows, you see those men with those bustles back here behind them? When they walk by, you step aside and don't touch those feathers. When you honor those feathers, you honor the deeds that they did to collect them. Back in the day when we were warriors, By the way that a man wore his feather, you knew he had been in battle. Maybe he had been injured. He had killed a foe. But by the way that he wore his feathers, you knew his history as a warrior. They're special. Our veterans are special to us. You don't ever approach a veteran from behind. You don't tap them on the back. Jack Davis told me that when he would see my dad, he would always, if Dad didn't see him, he would like do something with his hand visually so that Dad would see Jack, and then they would have a conversation. He never initiated that conversation with the veteran. The story goes that our veterans, they should never have to look over their back in fear. They've earned it. It's a good story. That's my dad. And if you've ever watched, some of y'all already know this, but if you've ever watched Walker, Texas Ranger, well, you're looking at your medicine man right there. He'd call me on a Saturday afternoon and say, I'm going to be on TV tonight. And I'd say, that's great, Dad. I hated that show. I never watched it. I think I actually saw like a 10-second clip of him one time, and that's it. And he did say that Chuck Norris, he couldn't ride a horse to save his life. Am I doing okay on time? Are y'all asleep? Okay. They're back there asleep. We can wake them up when we leave. I could go on forever and ever, but I just want to finish with this one story. The old man and the coyote. You see, there was this old man. He was born at a time when the Comanches, we were still warriors and we roamed the plains. We were hunters. But in his lifetime, he had seen our transition to the reservation. That reservation treaty, it was only good for 30 years. It wasn't one of those as long as the wind blows and the grass grows, etc. It only had 30 years. It was only good for 30 years. After that 30 years, he had transitioned to his allotted land. Each Comanche member was given 160 acres. He was spending the rest of his days there on his allotted land. But he missed those days that he remembers as a youth of being free out there. So he thought, one time, before I pass, I'm going to go live as the Comanches used to live. He went out into the Wichita Mountains that evening and made himself a little camp, little fire, and it was a perfect evening. The stars were out. It was calm. It was just like he remembered as a child. But out of the darkness, he heard something. And he calls out, Madoway. Yes, hello. He said, who's out there? And out of the darkness steps this coyote, a cutsita. And in this cutsita's mouth is a gahoo, a mouse. His eyes are like saucers. And he drops the gahoo on the ground. He says, Toko, grandfather, it's me, Cutsita. Well, now the old man's surprised. He says, you speak the Dummadau tongue? And the coyote says, yes, grandfather. All the plains animals speak the Dummadau tongue. But there's no more Comanches out here. We never hear it spoken. So the coyote sat there by the fire with him, and they just shared stories that evening, just talking back and forth of the better days that they remember. But finally, that coyote says, Toko, I've got to go. When you called out to me, it surprised me, and I dropped my dinner. I'm still hungry. So they say their goodbyes, and that coyote trots off into the darkness. And by now, this fire, it's nearly out. The old man, he's tired. He knows it's time to rest. And he lays his head back down and closes his eyes. And he hears this tiny little voice call out to him. It said, "Don't go, Buddha." "Grandfather, thank you." And he opens his eyes just in time to see a little Gahu tail slip off into the darkness. That's a Comanche story for Comanches. It's a reminder to us not to forget our past, remember where we came from in our traditions. It's a good story, and you could apply that, not just Comanches, but wherever your past may be, you could apply that same thought process. I want to thank you all for allowing me to come visit with you this evening. Thank you. Did y'all have any? Like down here, the beaded wood, or just a sash? This is a beaded belt that my grandmother did for my father for his regalia. And then that's just a sash that you tie around your waist and let it hang to the side. It just makes us look fancy. Oh, a skirt? Yeah, it's a skirt. Yeah, I mean, you had your leggings and then you had your skirt front and back. What else? Yes, sir. The Star House, it's ready to fall in. Herbert Woosner bought the house from a Parker. He actually built an amusement park just there at Cache that it folded after a few years. But he kept the house up, and we would have Parker reunion powwows on weekends, like during the summer, one weekend, a summer there. When Herbert passed, he willed the house to his nephew and niece, and they've not been able to do anything with it. And there's been several efforts to purchase the house, to fix it up, etc. Actually, Texas A&M went in there with their laser beams and scanned the house so that if it ever does collapse or becomes unrepairable, they could build a replica exactly like it. I don't think the house is ever going to be restored. There's an effort going on right now. Bob Saul from Fort Worth, other people are trying to raise money. The last effort was maybe about 6 or 7 years ago. We met. It would cost about $200,000 to take the outside porch that surrounds the house, take it out, put them in storage, plywood the walls, give it a new roof, and that would allow time to raise, I don't know, $500,000 to actually restore the house the way it should be. That never quite happened. But I personally feel it's probably going to fall in. But there is an effort going on. Bob Saul is trying to save the Star House, and you can go, I think Facebook, Save the Star House, something like that, if you want to contribute to that. Yeah. Yes. Correct. He was never defeated in battle. The adobe walls, we attacked, but basically, those buffalo hunters that were in there, their guys could shoot a mile away. Our bow and arrows and our little, 30-30s wasn't any match for that. If you call that a defeat, you could call it a defeat, but we do say that he was never defeated in battle. That's correct. Yes, sir. We were the first ones on them, and it was just, the horse was everything to us. We understood that. And then they were just fierce warriors. They didn't give up. Those Apaches, we pushed them off into New Mexico. But that West Texas area, that was Comanche land. You didn't go there. Quanah, Texas, he was still alive. There was it was a little settlement already, and they wanted to make a town and bring a train through there. And they asked Quanah if they could use his name as their town. He didn't just say yes. He went to the town and he offered a blessing there. The last 2 years, there's a Quanah Parker descendants gathering there. The Medicine Mounds is about 10 miles away. Cynthia recaptured just over there at the Peace River. That whole area is special to us. But he went there that day and actually offered a prayer blessing for that town to let them use his name as their town. Quanah Parker Burgess. Yeah, I couldn't hear you. What? Oh, in the post office. Okay. This year, Quanah Parker Burgess, another descendant, they hired him to paint the side of a building. It's like 15 feet tall and about 70 feet wide. He painted Quanah Parker on a horse, a couple of Quahatis on their horses on either side. But, go online to Quanah Parker Museum, something like that. I think you'll see lots of pictures of that. But yeah, I actually gave a talk there at that depot. It's been 20 years ago, maybe. But they really hold Quanah with reverence. And Lane Frost, that's also from Quanah, Texas, the world champion bull rider in 1987. He's special to me because I named my son after him. So there's a real connection with that town. I actually saw a document. The generic story is that she did try to escape several times and go back. That's true. A cousin of hers who ended up marrying, if I say he ended up being the governor of Kansas, so something like that. But she was a cousin to Cynthia. She went back after the fact and interviewed people that knew Cynthia when she was there, and asked what was it like, and they said she was a worker. If there was anything to be doing, she had probably already done it. She, Tahmahkera, Quanah's little sister, was an infant when they were recaptured at the Peace. I think she grew up to the age of 4 when she passed I'm not sure what the disease was, but if it was the flu or whatever it was. Cynthia had starved herself to death after that. You know, she had just completely given up. Y'all want to hear just one more little story? Okay. Like I said, back in June, we had this Quanah Parker, they said this gathering there at Quanah. And my Uncle Ko and Ron Parker, they're being interviewed in this bar one morning. Film crew from all over. I mean, there was 2 or 3 people from New York, a couple of people from California. They all just met there as a film crew, and they were doing interviews. And my uncle and Ron were being interviewed that morning. And Uncle Ko, his son Gary, my cousin, we sat outside of the camera, range there, and we just listened to their stories, which was just fantastic. But Ko said when the Comanche men would go hunt the buffalo, we'd first look on the ground for a horny toad. And we'd go talk to the horny toad and we'd say, if I get this right, Pavi, brother, Akaputu, where to? Tasiwo, buffalo. He's basically asking the horny toad, brother, where's the buffalo? And those horny toads, you've seen them, they'll do this. And that whichever direction he would do that, that's where they would go. Now, if they found the buffalo, great. If they didn't find the buffalo, they just figured the horny toad was wrong. So, true. So, Uncle Ko said he was outside the field one time and he looked down and there's a horny toad and he thought he'd give it a shot. So he looks down, he says, Bobby, Hakaputu, Tasiwo. And that horny toad just, on cue, just went like that. And Ko looked over there and he looked back and he says, Bobby, those are cows. We just scratched the surface here, guys. You tell me, are we running out of time here? Okay. Oh, this is it. I ain't coming back to Dallas no more. Okay. Sorry, what? My sister's buckskin dress. Our grandmother made that for her. She only made 2 dresses, one for herself and one for my sister. Took her 3 years. She taught my sister all the different dances, their meetings, etc. You got some of my dad's regalia here, bows and arrows. The moccasins. You got the infant moccasins, the child moccasins. Those were mine when I was a child. The blue moccasins, that's Would You Watch It Takers. The books over there, those are the ones that are important to us, that are the accurate ones that we like. You can thumb through it. You can come pick this stuff and look at it. Y'all want another children's story? Have y'all ever seen a bat? Not a baseball bat, but the one that flies. Okay, let's talk about the bat, how the bat came to be. We look to the east in the morning. The sun comes up off the horizon. That sun, it brings us light so we can see. It brings us warmth. It makes the grass grow. We need that sun. But there was a day that the sun was coming up off the horizon and it got stuck in a large tree. And the more the sun struggled to get away from this tree, the more the limbs covered the sun up. And it got to the point where there was no light, there was no warmth. And all the plains animals, they didn't notice right away, but it didn't take too long. They figured something was wrong. They're cold, it's dark, we have no light. So a council was called of all the animals. And they all gathered, and they all agreed something must have happened to the son. We should go check on him. But who's going to go? Who's going to volunteer? You got the buffaloes, you got the horses, you got, the strong animals, the fast animals. They were all too afraid. But one of the smallest creatures, a squirrel, stepped forward, and he says, I'll go check on the buffalo. So off he goes to the east. Which way? Is the east that way? I want to be correct if I want to tell you. Is east that way? Let's pretend east is that way. Our navigator here. So off he goes. And it's a long ways, it's cold, it's dark, and he gets tired. But he understands that all the other animals, they're dependent on him to go find the son and check on him. So he keeps going. And he finally comes up to this big tree, and he can see that the sun's in there. The sun can see through the limbs enough to see the squirrel. He said, please, Mr. Squirrel, get me out of this tree. I'm stuck. Everybody's dependent on my light. They're dependent on my warmth. And that squirrel didn't hesitate. He went right up that trunk and he started gnawing the limbs off. And as the limbs fell to the ground, it got hotter and hotter and hotter. And the squirrel stopped. The son said, Mr. Squirrel, why did you stop? And he says, because your heat has burned me. It's burned my fur away. It's burned my tail away. And the son said, but Mr. Squirrel, everybody's dependent on my warmth, the grass for it to grow. They all need this warmth, and please, few more limbs. So the squirrel keeps with it. And the squirrel stops the second time, and the son said, why did you stop now? He says, because your light is too bright. It's blinded me. I can't see anymore. And the son said, just a few more limbs, I'm almost free. So the squirrel kept at it, just a few more limbs, and all of a sudden the sun burst up in the sky. It was like it should be. There was light, there was warmth. And the son looked back to the squirrel to say thank you and saw what had been sacrificed. The squirrel said, what of me? I have no fur, I have no tail, I'm blind. And the son said, for what you've sacrificed for others, I'll grant you any wish. So the squirrel said, I've always wanted to fly. He says, okay, I'll give you wings and I'll make it so you can fly at night. You don't have to see. So that's how the bat came to be. I remember Uncle Ben telling me those stories when I was just a child. It was really neat. A story Dad used to talk about was the turtle. Y'all see the turtle, his back with the shell, that kind of a checkerboard kind of design. The quick one about that is that an old woman was grinding corn one day, and a turtle comes up to her, and he's just staring at her. And she says, go away, squirrel, you bother me. And he doesn't move, he just keeps looking at her. And she gives him 2 or 3 warnings, and finally she just grabs him and puts him in the grinder and ground him up. So that's how the turtle got the design on his back. I never understood the meaning of that story, other than don't mess with your grandmother when she's trying to cook, Thank y'all very much.
Thank you again, Lance, for joining us. I was going to ask, if people want to keep in contact with you, did you want to share how they could do so or find you? Okay. Let us know. Email us at marketing@dallashistory.org. And if you have any questions or if you want to keep in contact with Lance, we can go ahead and file that away to him. So thank you again for joining us. Don't forget, this is the last program for the year. We still need volunteers. And say hello to David in the back. He's going to be joining us and taking over for programming. So be on the lookout for next year's calendar. We're going to have lots more exciting programs in store for you. So thank you again. Y'all have a safe drive.